Alrighty. Hello, everybody. Bum, bum, bum. Bring the music down just a hair. There we go. Howdy, howdy, howdy. Ghostly, how you doing? Alright. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Happy New Year. Happy New Year to all our peeps. Happy New Year! Hey, Artemis Point! Welcome, welcome, welcome in. Oh, tea's still a little hot. Alright. How's everybody's New Year? Everybody have a good holiday, good New Year? Hopefully starting off on a positive foot. Doing very, very dandy. Well, that's delightful, Ghostly. Glad to hear it. Yes, I managed to actually get back out on a workout routine after having not done anything for like the latter half of December. So it was rough, but it was the laziest, but I felt good about it. Actually started getting up early again, getting some writing done in the morning. So feeling good, feeling good about the new year. Yes, I finally fixed my sleep schedule. Hey, you too. Oh, good. Yeah, mine's not totally fixed yet. I'm still not getting up as early as I should be, but I'm getting there. Getting there. It's just... it's hard. It's hard after the holidays where I just completely devolve back into being a night owl. So I have to, like, go back from 3:30, 4 a.m. going to sleep to trying to at least get to sleep around midnight. Bum, bum, bum. All right. But other than that, how's it going? I was going to work on Pawn Boys today, but I've started having problems bringing all my stuff over from my Mac partition to the Windows partition. And for whatever reason, all of my Pawn Boy stuff is like locked and encrypted, I guess. I don't know. I can't access it. So I'm working on my other project that I started this year. So no Pawn Boys today. But later this week, if I can figure that out, I will be back on the men saving two lowly men saving fish in Los Angeles. Oh goodness, 2024 has started with Ghostly getting a date with a Marine, so I'm living my lesson. Ghostly, you're winning 2024. Well done. Artemis, you won. This year is going to give for sure. That's good. Ghostly, congrats. Well done. Well done on getting yourself a date with a Marine. I hope your date goes absolutely delightful and swimmingly. And the Marine is a wonderful, wonderful gentleman of sorts. But that is good. Good. Yep. So looks like everyone's starting the year off with a good vibes, fixing sleep schedules, living the best life Ghostly could possibly live by writing constantly and winning dates with Marines. So good. Seems like the vibes. Hopefully these are strong vibes to carry us through the year. All right. Me too. I'm shaking in my little red boots. This isn't a thing I do. I write about this. I do not participate. Ghostly, one of the biggest things that a writer has to learn is that you have to, unfortunately, participate in some of the things you write about. Not all, but you do. It is good. It is good to go live life and have experiences. That you've got plenty of voice. You've definitely got plenty of voice there, but you do. It behooves writers. It behooves people to go and live life, make mistakes, get your heart broken, fall in love, be a good person, realize you might have been a terrible person, just all the things, the encompassing of the human experience. No fear. Artemis, so real. I can just words. That, some people can. Some people are, particularly if you want to write like the dreamy things, but I don't know. And you clearly have enough empathy from some of the other stuff I've read, Ghostly, is this you talking to people, you seem to be able to pretty clearly understand their emotional states, so you can kind of, I mean, all writers kind of mine and steal from other people's stories, other people's experiences, just people that you encounter in life. But it's good. It's good to experience some things for yourself. Not all things, but some things. It's definitely good to live life a little bit. Did you ever watch the Christian Bale with a beard? The Christian Bale with a beard. No, I haven't watched it yet. I'm trying to catch up on my movies this week, so I will do my best to watch it. But it does look good. I actually have to watch it before my Netflix expires. So, Ghostly, yes, I am an empath, and it's an interesting ability. My life is vicarious. Well, it's not vicarious now. You're going on a date, so go make it. Whether or not it's an absolutely lovely transcendent experience, or it's a delightfully embarrassing and silly experience. All those both things in the grand stretch of the world, I think will benefit you. Benefit you and benefit not only you but also your writing and just your point of view. Haha, we'll see. Yeah, that's the problem. It's sometimes being a writer's hard. It's hard to you want to write about experiences, but sometimes you do get thrust into the world where you have to experience things that maybe you're like not 100% ready for. I like to think my life is a comedy. That's good. That's a good way. In the a comedy in the Greek sense of the term, comedy and tragedy. Where we at, everybody? All right. Well, we'll probably get rolling here shortly, but Artemis Point, Bless of My Life was a show. It was a show. It was canceled after season 2 viewership tanked. Oh, I don't know about that, Artemis. That is far too self-deprecating. I doubt that. Absolutely and wholly and completely doubt that viewership would have tanked and it would have been canceled after season 2. And if you think about it, if you think of your life as a show, it hasn't been canceled because it's still going. So make with it what you do. You are a giving main character. You are a giving main character. Yes. Yeah. No. I highly doubt that, Artemis Point. I am sure your life is, and it's it's hard. It's definitely hard, but to go out and quote unquote find experiences, or but it is important. It is an important facet of life to be able to go and see things, experience people at their best and people at their worst. Kind of really, really see the world in its totality. It does benefit. It does benefit us, like writers and artists and people, to see those things and experience those things, because it becomes there is a problem that happens, and you actually see it happen a lot in Hollywood too, where things become so self-referential and so inundated in their own kind of world. It kind of locks the viewpoint. The sort of it becomes very homogenous, and that is, nothing is worse than uniformity and homogeneity when it comes to the arts. Nothing is worse. That is the death knell of the arts. While I would be the main character of a road movie, especially in Arizona, I have lived a few road movies, Ghostly. I've been the main character on plenty of my own little escapades through the world, and that's why I sit down and try to write them now. Not all of them, but it would be a road movie. I've spent so much time driving across the United States. I literally have done coast to coast at least twice. It's actually no, more than twice. I've done Coast to Coast 4 times. Yep. Um, Coast to Coast on the northern. Yeah, I did North and South. I did Central America, Central U.S. over to New York, and New York back through the South, and then I did Southern, driving along the coast to my to Florida, Florida from California. Um, for some reason, if I am to imagine you as a movie, um, I picture this weird cross between Rubber and Bones and All. I think that's what's up. Bones and All is one of my favorite movies. That's one of my favorite recent movies. Yep, the Timothy Chalamet cannibal romance movie. I love that movie. That is it's that movie harkens back to like some of my favorite Terrence Malick movies, like Badlands and Days of Heaven from the 70s. But yeah, with a sort of like cannibalistic love story. I don't know. I don't even think it's like some people, I don't even think it's a horror movie. I love that movie. Yeah, I love that film. Well, you have those vibes for better or for worse. Yeah, that's. I've lived. I've definitely lived. I've had a few. I wouldn't say necessarily as a direct parallel, but I've had a few. I've had a few of the quote unquote road romances that might have fit into that vibe. Not like just while you're driving across the country, but that vibe for sure. I've definitely lived some life there for sure. Thank you, Ghostly, for better or for worse. They be vibes. Um, but good times. Some of my favorite memories were driving around doing that. But I was indeed not eating people and murdering people, so I never did that. never had that go down. I'm telling you, we need the autobiography. That's half of the things I write. Even if I'm not writing directly about myself, half of the scripts and the movies I write all of them are autobiographical. I mean, at least to a core thematically and emotionally, they're all about things that I've experienced and what I've lived through to a degree, even if not the actual happenings themselves actually happened. I find that to be a far more interesting way to convey my thoughts and feelings about elements of my life than just directly being like, this happened and this happened. It just becomes a summary of events. It doesn't quite necessarily go down to the sort of emotional truth, or at least the personal, subjective truth of what it was happening. So, now that's. Well, now that's to get all artsy about it. I'm not that smart to decipher things. It's all vibes, Ghostly. You don't have to be smart for it. It's just vibes. You don't have to be all like intellectual, symbolic deep dive. It's all just the moods and the vibes and the tones. That's what it all be. I even think symbolism itself is overrated. At least in modern art, we use it too much as a crutch. But I write old men hitting murders with self-help books. I don't think. I mean, Ghostly, that you don't have to think when you write stories about old men hitting murderers with self-help books, because that is hilarious and delightful. So, there is zero problem with that. Don't. Maybe someday I will write when I'm old and feeble and can't, in a few years, in a couple years, when I can't walk anymore because of I somehow become so old man grump that I can't walk anymore. I'll write a autobiography at some point. In 3 years, exactly, Ghostly. In 3 years, I will have to write an auto, because I will not be able to make a movie anymore. I'll be too old. Too old. Too old to begin the film life. No thoughts, only vibes. In 3 years, you need to be that pretentious prick that stars in your own biopic. Yeah, I'm not acting. I loved being on stage. I loved acting on stage. I don't act on camera. I'm not going to act in a movie. Unless it's like a little, Hitchcockian Kubrick sort of, you're in the background doing a thing. I am not doing that especially not in a movie I'm making. I am not starring. That is too. It's not even just pretension. It's too much work. That's a lot of. Do you know how much work that is to like star in your own movie that you're also having to shoot and direct and write? That's rough. That's that's more exhausting. I mean, directing as it stands, is one of the most emotionally and physically exhausting things you could possibly do. So having to act on top of that, I just nope, not for me. You have to really love yourself or hate yourself, either way. Or maybe hating yourself to that degree is loving yourself in a weird sadistic sort of way. But you definitely have to have some very, very, very opinionated thoughts about yourself, for sure. I believe in self-love, but at that point, you need to get rid of your mirrors. I mean, yes. There is a distinction between self-love and self-care and self-obsession and self sort of aggrandizement, which is not always the easiest line to walk for certain people. Harder for some more than others. If you tend to be a meeker person, I think it can sometimes. Although meekness can kind of start to dribble into like resentment and like weird passive aggressive, vile sort of like become like a little, angry person. That's a very Midwestern thing where everyone's very polite and very kind and sweet, but like they can be some of the most resentful, scathing people you've ever met. I say that as a person who has a lot of family from the Midwest, so I feel like I'm allowed to. But yes, there is. Don't look at yourself in the mirror too much. The duality of man. Human beings are multitudes. That's probably the best note you could ever have for writing characters. Just take two opposing things that characters have. Like, there are things that they both want that are diametrically opposed to each other. And that creates in them a cognitive dissonance for them being able to justify one or the other. And that's generally how human beings it's not a universal, but it's, a lot of people tend to act that way. I say that on the regular because of that one conversation we had that one time. Yeah, it's also my favorite quote from Full Metal Jacket. You're right. Born to kill on your helmet, wear a peace button on your jacket. Is that supposed to be some sort of sick joke? It's about the duality of man, sir. The what? The duality of man. The Jungian thing. Whose side are you on, son? Such a good bit. But anyway. Hot take. There is no such thing as universal. I haven't seen Full Metal Jacket. That's probably fine. I don't know if you would like that movie, Ghostly. The movie's it's a Kubrick film, but it might be a little too intense. There's some intense stuff in that movie. But that little sequence, you can watch it on YouTube. You can just watch the duality of man sequence on YouTube. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just a little short scene. Hot take, there's no such thing as universal. That's an interesting, very hitting on the relativist takes. The only thing that's a universal is that nothing is universal. Sorry, that's an old philosophy thing. It's an old philosophy joke about... It's an old philosophy play on words. That is pretentious. That's what we call pretentious wordplay. I am but a wee cornflake, aren't we? Aren't we all? That's just who we are. We be the wee cornflakes. Bum, 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 bum. All right. We're almost at about 30 minutes. Almost at 30 minutes. All right. So before we get started, I'm just going to run another ad, but I don't think anyone's going to get hit by it. I'm pretty sure you're all subs. So there we go. And then we will get a rolling. Speaking of philosophy pretentious, I am going to be taking notes on a old philosophy text for my mech movie trilogy that I'm going to start working on this year too. So, interesting. Interesting. I get to read about the justifications of revolutionary violence and whether or not it's justified. Speaking of universals. Because no matter how much I think, I realize there are always caveats. Ah, yeah, that's true. Yeah, there are always caveats. There are always things that cannot be taken into. Now, some people might argue that things like universals, like mathematics and philosophy, they would call that a priori, or essentially knowledge before knowledge. Essentially, like a universal truth of the universe would be like mathematics or something like that. Um, but maybe it's not. As we know, fundamental math starts to break down with the more you start really you the more that we know about pretty much all the sciences, including mathematics, everything just starts to completely fall apart the smaller you go. So who knows? But but mathematics is a human creation, is it not? Aren't all humans flawed? It's yeah, I mean, the argument would be at that point is that mathematics wouldn't be the sort of enlightenment empirical argument would be that mathematics exists and is an explanatory language for how the world works. So in that case, it's created, but what it's explaining is universal. That would be the old enlightenment, that would be the old enlightenment way. So like another version of that would be like, quote unquote, the law of non-contradiction. So like the fundamental laws of logic would be like not human creations, but existent in the world. So the law of non-contradiction, which is like says that like two things can't be like both it and not it at the same time. I mean, this is getting deep into like philosophy stuff. I'm just saying this. I don't know if I agree with any of this, but like that is an elephant and that is not an elephant. Like that both can't be true. Things like that would be considered like universals. Then of course, you look at mathematics in sort of modern quantum mechanics, and you're right. Like it's the language used to describe the universe breaks down and falls apart at the subatomic levels. So and actually the laws of logic too. Like the idea of a wave being both a particle and a wave based on whether or not it's being measured is weird. It's so there are things don't work. So in that way, you could argue that you would be correct, Ghostly, that it's that the description, the observational descriptions themselves fail in their sort of universal application to a degree. Surely all creations of man are also flawed. I don't actually believe in any of this. I just like thinking sometimes. Thinking is good, Ghostly. Thinking is good. Hyphen on sometimes. No, thinking is good. I mean, this is my bread and butter, man. This is where I spent most of my life thinking about this stuff, particularly before college, after college. I grew up in a very like one of the big reasons why I grew up in a household with a lot of different points of view, both religious and philosophical and political. And so I spent a lot of my youth being like, okay, well, what is what? Like, what is this? Because everyone's telling me like 9 different things, and none of this makes any sense. So I spent a lot of my life thinking about this stuff, or at least thinking about, yes, bar fight mother, very smart father. Yeah, my dad. Well, I mean, my dad is the math guy. He's the 100% like believes in science and all that kind of stuff. I have a Catholic stepmother. I have a bar fighting new age hippie mother. I have a sort of old school pagan brother. Yeah, like old school like Nordic pagan stuff. But and then my mom was definitely into like the sort of new agey, like crystals and Tai Chi and some of that stuff. I mean, I got it kind of into Tai Chi when I was doing Eastern philosophy, but like more of like the weird Western hippie version of it, like the same. I call it the Sedona, Arizona vibe. Those sort of people. But then of course, yeah, then she would go drink a bunch and get into bar fights. Um, uh, Not to insinuate your mother isn't bright. She just seems like both sharp and a tough cookie. She is. That is my mother. She is both sharp and a tough cookie. She's. I see the hippie qualities passed down just as much. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh man. In high school, I doubled down, man. I was listening to the Doors and Jefferson Airplane on vinyl because I couldn't afford CDs, and vinyl records at the time were only like 50 cents to 75 cents at the record store, and I had my parents' old record player, so we would play. I would play vinyl. I had a bunch of like colored lights, and I like was in a loft, so I didn't have like four walls. So one of them had like a bead. It was like I remember it was a Mona Lisa bead curtain and a Japanese divider. Um, yeah, it was a Japanese divider, and I had like a glow in the dark like Buddha thing on the wall, and a tiny little like television with a built-in VCR that I got, and the tiny built-in VCR. I remember I got Employee of the Month at the movie theater I worked at, and I was able to buy a little external DVD player to plug into the TV so I could watch like my movie commentaries. Yeah. Anyway, it was a very decked out hippie room for sure. I mean, it's not wildly different now. I've modded my tastes a little bit, but it's still vague. It still has heavy hippie vibes. Uh, let's see. Oh my gosh, you're that old. Vinyl was less than $1. Ghostly. You're that old? You're so old. uh yes, Ghostly. I was when I was a kid, CDs were still very very expensive. I used to record tapes. I had a tape player. Now I'm not old enough that I was into listening to like A tracks or anything, but like like a cassette tape, like a Walkman cassette. I'd record off the radio songs I liked. Um, but yes, when I was growing up, pretty vinyl had started to make its comeback. New bands, like current bands, had started publishing vinyl again. The resurgence started late in high school for me. So I was so that like yeah, it was late high school, early college when that boomed. When all of a sudden vinyls were like $20-$30 and I was like, what is happening? I just want to be able to go buy my $1.50 vinyl where because you could literally go down. I bought like all of Led Zeppelin's albums for, probably like $10 back in the day. I mean my Ziggy record, which is like completely destroyed. I bought that my freshman or sophomore year of high school, and I think I got that for 75 cents. I'm pretty sure I got my Ziggy Stardust for 75 cents. Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. That room sounds lit though. Thank you, Ghostly. I was very proud of my weird high school hippie room. All right, at this point, let's go back to the era because the last vinyl I got was $40. Oh my god, yeah. I mean, I because I be because I still to a degree collect vinyl from time to time. I got a collection of all the Showa era Godzilla soundtracks, and that was not a cheap vinyl collection. Um, I say this with love. You're the best old man that yells at grass. Thank you, Ghostly. I appreciate being. I appreciate the sentiment. All right, everybody. Let's get to work. I mean, I could go on for days about the old vinyl days, back when it was affordable, because it's really not now. Um, Also, keep in mind it costs money to make vinyls, so that's also why they're more expensive. Like people were getting rid of because vinyls take up so much space and they're heavy. People were just getting rid of those things when I was growing up. So of course they were cheap because record stores had a million of them because people just didn't want them anymore. They're heavy and take up a lot of space. All right, alrighty, let's get to writing. All right, everything's good. All right, everybody. Happy writing, and we will catch you on the other side. Away we go. Alrighty, and that is the end of that sprint. Ghostly heading off. Gonna call it early. Have a great and lovely evening. Get some rest, and we'll see you all later, Ghostly. See you all tomorrow, viewers promise. All good, all good. Definitely feel free to stop by. We'll be here tomorrow, but have a lovely night, Ghostly. Bam. Let me bring the music down here a little bit. Got the timer started. Last time I was terrible. I was terrible last week about remembering the down timer. So I'm trying to be very specific. Just remember, must start the timer. All right. Well, hopefully that was a good sprint for everybody. Words happened. Things were done. Progress was made. Even if words didn't happen, there's still progress. Oh man, the more I'm reading on this Iron Window book, or the Iron Widow book, this looks like my jam. I mean, it's got mechs. And Handmaid's Tale, that's pretty good. Man. I've got so many books to read. I'm already so behind. That's both the benefit and the downside of being involved in like writer Twitch, is it's a constant supply of absolutely excellent book recommendations. I don't think I've had a bad book recommendation from anybody in the community yet, but it definitely makes the stacks get so high. Ugh, I'm already so behind. Particularly since it's involving mechs, I could theoretically justify this as being useful for research. Just seeing what else is going on in the literary world of mech. Science fiction mech stuff. Bum, bum, bum. I'm so used to reading on my Kindle now or on the iPad that when I have to read PDFs on the computer, the bright white just sears my eyeballs. All these old scans from these public access books. How long have I had the idea for the trilogy? Not long, actually. I've wanted to do mech anime. I grew up with mech anime. Artemis Way should be illegal to not have a dark mode. I agree with you. I mean, like the web browser's in dark mode, but of course the scans are not. But I 100% agree. I wish everything was in dark mode for my poor eyes. My poor eyes. I'm gonna be bleeding by the end of this. But no, I've kind of always flirted with the idea of doing a mech series. So like my favorite anime of all time is Neon Genesis Evangelion. I grew up watching Macross. And got really into like Gundam, so I was really into mech anime, and pretty much I never really had I never felt like I had a good enough idea for a story, and for whatever reason it was a mixture, I think, of Dune, going back and rereading Dune, and then watching the new Dune movie, and then playing the new Armored Core. That the new Armored Core FromSoft game, that kind of like, and the more recent like ideas about apartheid is kind of what birthed the idea in my head of like, okay, I'm gonna make a series of like switching a mech story where it's switching sides between sides, kind of the same way Gundam does, and a little bit the way the Dune books work, where essentially this super powerful, maybe alien influenced mech gets passed between two different social political organizations that are vying for power in the sort of context of a sort of futuristic form of apartheid. And so that's kind of been the grounding, and now I'm kind of like getting more a little bit more like existential with it, trying to see if I want to go like how much into like weird Ava territory where we start like, you know, the world melts away, or if I'm going to keep it purely like kind of like a meditation on warfare and violence through a sort of mechanized extension of human beings fighting each other. So, but the general crux of the idea is probably only about 4 or 5 months old. So, it's recent. Recent for me. Usually things bubble a lot longer in the back of my head, but I think I finally just felt something that I wanted to I found something I wanted to explore that I felt like a mech genre would be a solid way to explore it. So that like explained nothing, so I apologize for that. I like to say I have the roll. I have to roll the Katamari around until it has enough mass to become a star. That's a great way to put it. The kids are asleep. That is probably the most emotionally, like, that might be the best description of what it is to just try to come up with ideas I have ever heard. It absolutely is just. It is, and it also feels like the vibe of that game. Like, there's quirky music. There's a weird pill-shaped father in the back of my brain that's telling me that it's not good enough. While I'm just gathering up, like, you're just walking through the world, and in your brain you're just rolling up a bunch of very silly looking creatures and people to turn them into stars. Anyway, and sometimes you roll up unexpected things. Exactly. That's very good, and it all comes together to be the final product. Yep. That's a great way of putting it. I'm when I talk, I don't know if anyone's gonna get that reference, but the next time I'm having a night with my fellow screenwriters and we're talking about the lament of being writers, I'm gonna steal that. I don't know if any of them have actually played Katamari, but they might not get it. But that's their loss, because that is a absolutely. I think that might be that might be my favorite description of what it's like to write, or just an analogy of coming up with an idea or developing an idea over time. It's good. I love it. But what are you all working on? How's it going, Artemis Point? How's the writing, the words treating you? Hopefully everything's going well. Hopefully the kids are indeed asleep or in the process of being asleep. I have no idea. I have no idea how anyone who has kids has the time and the energy to write. It is an aspect of everyone who does that, mothers and fathers and everyone out there, that I admire greatly. Because I feel like I wouldn't get anything done. I think I'd just want to take a nap. Just being an uncle makes me want to take a nap. I have the least amount of responsibility. Just outlining right now. Otherwise, all right. I get that, Artemis Point. Just doing the outlines. Yep, you write the same way everyone else does, one word at a time. That's very true. They are so awake, and they go back to school tomorrow. Oh no. Yeah. I was one of those kids. I remember when I was a kid, I had a hard time sleeping before school. But it wasn't because I mean, there was a mixture of dread and terror and angst about it. But it was more the social elements of going to school made me terrified. But I was always actually really excited to go to my favorite classes. So I had a hard time sleeping. I actually had the same problem in college, too. Anytime before I'd start a semester, I just couldn't sleep. I'd be up all night. Because I don't know. I was, I guess, a weirdo. I really enjoyed my classes. Like, I liked learning. And I had a lot of good professors, too. Or teachers when I was a kid. They're bitter about not being able to play their new video games. Oh, gotcha. Okay. Oh, they're spiteful. They're just like, arr. That's funny. Artemis Point, I had no problem sleeping once I decided I'd fake a sickness in the morning. That is funny. Speaking of kids, be right back. Good luck. The kids are asleep. Godspeed. I don't think I've ever. No, the only times I've ever faked sickness or tried to get out of school was like being bullied and stuff, where I didn't want to go because I knew something terrible was gonna happen. But yeah. And usually I didn't pretend to be sick. I just didn't go to school. I just left home and then would go somewhere else. Usually the library is where I would go. There was a library, like a public library right by this where my school was, so I would go there. And my school was notoriously bad about reporting me being absent to my parents. Like, they would have no idea. That's kind of why I kept doing it. Is they would report it as an absence, but they would never like call my parents and be like, he didn't show up for school. So they just, or if they did, none of my parents ever responded to it. I mean, both my parents are really busy and off doing stuff, so they might have called the house and just left a message and all that. Maybe my brother was secretly doing me solids and deleting the he didn't show up for school, so just to keep me safe from my parents. I don't know. Anyway, all right, that is the end of that break. So let us hop back to it, everybody. Happy writing, and we will see you all on the other side. ads coming in really quick, so feel free to mute during the sprint so you're not just like blown away by whatever Twitch is throwing your way. is the end of our second sprint. Let me start the down timer. Sorry about the ad in the middle there, everybody. I usually try to be on top of that, and I messed up. So I'm going to go ahead and... Alright, we'll have to remember to run an ad for this break. Actually, we'll just go and do that right now. I'm going to use the... Be right back. But yeah, go make some tea. Take a break, stretch, do what you gotta do, dodge the ads. And we'll be right back in 2 minutes. Boop. There we go. Alright. Alright, looks like 20 more seconds. 20 more seconds. Sam Bird Cybernetics. By the way, yeah, that was a great question you asked during the sprint about research. I love the name. What aspect of your story are you doing research for? I'm new to your stream. Yeah, no, of course. No, ask away. There's never too many questions. It's totally fine. So I am researching. I am using this. So I'm writing a mech science fiction trilogy. Films. Watch it films as a screenwriter. So I am writing... I'm writing essentially one of the reasons why the three things that kind of conspired to, at least I kind of generally start with a theme or an idea, kind of like a grounding, like a concept I want to explore, and usually it's a concept that I'm personally like exploring, just either philosophically, emotionally, just something that I find curious about, I don't necessarily have the answers to. And so one of the reasons why I was thinking about this movie is kind of the idea that sort of either revolutions or like shirking colonial, your colonial bonds, like, or struggles through apartheid and things like that, sort of like broader, very like politically bleak, conflicts, like whether or not two things, whether or not violence inherent in mech or in any sort of quote unquote war story, is violence essentially like justifiable for like, so like anti-colonial violence, things like that, versus say like Hannah Arendt's position, which is that violence isn't, very like the sort of the more pacifist argument that it can always be circumvented. And so it started with that, and then now exploring whether or not these conflicts can these conflicts be synthesized in a way that would allow for a broader human action. So in this case, think of it like environmentalism. So like global warming, like can human or like the fundamental problems inherent in conflict between peoples, exploited and exploiter, things like that. Can these have? Can there be a broader unification to stop a greater threat, so to speak? So, um, so the broader sort of idea is like essentially that's a complicated way of saying can you put aside your differences and like stop something that's literally like gonna destroy everybody, um, and so that's like the idea I'm trying to get at, and specifically like what I was trying to do is just my sort of my own personal revulsion to violence, to but also the idea of like colonialism and the idea that like is there no other way, is there a way that like is violence quote unquote inherent in the system, so to speak. So that's kind of how I'm starting, and I'm doing that by reading. I've never actually read Fanon. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Fanon, but Fanon writes. He wrote "Wretched of the Earth," which was an argument. It was a book he wrote. He's like a socialist, a Marxist, and he wrote about essentially the justification of violence for overthrowing colonial oppressors. And this was specifically for French. Like if you've ever seen the movie The Battle of Algiers, it highly references Fanon in that movie, in that book. Fanon. It is Fanon. And Various and Sunday, welcome. First time. I love a theme about colonialism. Well, that's what I'm literally reading about, and that's is like that mixed with apartheid, things like that. So, because the mech genre for me has always been a broadly like, it's been broadly generally anti-war, deeply existential about the human condition. So three of my favorites will always be Neon Genesis Evangelion, Gundam, and Macross. And both of them tend to be pretty staunchly anti-war. They tend to talk about, but the thing that I really like particularly about Gundam and Dune, the Dune books do this really well, where they shift sides, where the good guys in the first part aren't always the good guys in the second part, and it's kind of like a back and forth. So you kind of see, you can kind of, and that's really interesting to do in film, because in film you can shift. Film is a very good emotional tool, so you can shift the point of view to essentially be like this thing that you thought was really like heroic and broad and interesting, like that was this heroic act that is lauded. You can very easily shift the emotional point of view or manipulate that point of view and then shift it in the next one and be like, oh, but here's the other side of it, and it can look like a absolutely like tyrannical, horrendous thing. And so that's why I think it's really interesting to use cinema to try to like show the diametrically opposed positions that you can view a singular conflict through. But then, yeah. So anyway, so I'm reading Frantz Fanon's The Wretch of the Earth, taking notes on it, looking at the argument that essentially like the argument essentially his theories on violence and anti-colonial, or the ability to overthrow your oppressors. And then I'm going to be reading Hannah Arendt, who's another philosopher, a Jewish philosopher, who's a favorite of mine. And she has a lot of very direct critiques of his. She was not a fan of Fanon, and she has some critiques of his theories on violence. So that's kind of where I'm starting, and then it'll expand. But this is generally how my research starts. And then I'll probably be reading a lot on like South Africa, South African apartheid, things like that, just to kind of get a little bit more history behind it before I really start building the world and structuring the narrative. Because it's going to be done in 3 movies. So first movie's one point of view, second movie's the other point of view. The third movie is going to be kind of the synthesized fundamental thesis of can violence and conflict of this nature be overcome, or is it sort of, I don't know if any of you have ever played Nier Automata, but is it inherent in the system? is it the cycle repeats over and over and over again? Let's see. So interesting. I would hope that in a time of crisis we could all come together, but I also see certain people in power taking advantage of the situation. That's usually what happens. Yeah, that's unfortunately, history tends to. Dune is brilliant, and Dune actually is a good example of how. Um, Dune is actually a really good example of exploring the idea that the only way out of these cycles of violence are also horrendous choices as well, because of Paul's terrible destiny or the terrible future, which is his only way to try to escape what he sees as either all of the Fremen and everybody being destroyed, or by the imperial powers that be. But it's also what causes him to become a tyrant, and whether or not that's justifiable or not. It's kind of the beautiful thing about Dune is that you think he's a hero until you get to the end of that first book, and then you're like, oh, this was about how a tyrant rises to power. Oh no. So anyway, yeah, I love Dune. Dune's an all-time. It's one of my favorite books. Artemis Point, do you have a favorite way to begin a movie, or would you say it's different every time? It's definitely different every time. I think I like the beginning of the movie to sort of sum up. Usually this is like you have to do this visually. It's not necessarily like a literary step, but I think visually, for me, beginning a movie needs to take like kind of the thesis or the question or the problem, and sort of like lay that out, and then the rest of the film is a sort of like exploration of that. So a really good example would be Martin Scorsese's Kundun. Martin Scorsese is probably the best ever to how to start a movie. He's very good at it, because it's very. Or another really good example is Close Encounters of the Third Kind. One of my that's actually, you want to talk about, that was Spielberg probably at the height of his prowess in terms of, you want to talk about theming in a movie, is if you've ever seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the movie starts with a man. Essentially, these planes show up in the desert. It's windy, and the planes were essentially their famous Bermuda Triangle story about these Corsair, the squadron that vanished, that everyone thinks got abducted by aliens. And the way that the movie starts is essentially these planes just appear in the desert, but it's in the middle of a windstorm, and you have the guy who's trying to who's investigating it, and he's a Frenchman and he can only speak French, talking to a man who can only speak English in the middle of a dusty windstorm. And that entire movie, the theme of that whole film, is the struggle of communication. Like that's how you theme a movie. That's how you, like, very clearly and implicitly in the structure of the story lay a theme down and create a cinematic situation that posits the problem, or the issue that the film is then going to try to deal with. And Kundun does it with Buddhism, with there's the sand mandala at the very beginning, and at the very beginning of the movie, you see them building the sand mandala, and then it's them washing it away. Because if you know that's kind of the whole movie, is the impermanence of the beautiful thing that gets washed away. So yeah, so that's probably like my 2 cents on starting a movie. The film's on my streaming service. Oh, you're watching it? It's one of my favorite Spielberg films. It's up there with Jaws for one of the better ones. Another person who's really good at doing that visually and thematically is Hayao Miyazaki. Miyazaki's are really, really, really good at doing that. Okay, I have talked too long. So let us get back to our sprints. Of course, if you do have questions, you can always feel free to put them in the chat. I just try to get back onto the sprints, and I don't talk during the sprints, so people who want to focus don't have to hear me yapping. So, all right, and away we go, everybody. Happy writing, and we will see ya on the wrong thing. We'll see you on the other side. Oh, man. And that's it for that sprint, everyone. Wow, that snuck up on me. Ooh. It was like not. I was getting wrapped up in the reading. All right, let me start the down timer. I think we're probably only gonna have time for one more sprint this eve, since it's gonna have to dip into a little bit later than I try to go, but I also started later. Artist Point Redeem, stretch! Everybody out there, be sure to stretch. Oh, it's a good idea. Oh. Literally felt my sternum pop. Oh, man. Yes. Oh, these old bones. Ugh. Ooh. Alright. Oh. Uno más. One more. Okay. Whew. The other thing I was thinking about, too, and I was actually thinking about it earlier this morning, is a lot of both books, but I mean, this goes back actually to playing the video game Armored Core and reading Dune, too, but there's also been an awful lot of, like, transhumanism going on in a lot of, like, the media. I've been, like, video games, movies, books. There's definitely a trend there, and I'm wondering if there might be a little bit of that I'm gonna have to put into this mech story. I kind of wanted like an engagement with an alien entity, because it comes from like Battleship Yamato and all that. I kind of like that. But oh yeah, it's been weird in the bill. Yeah, right. Well, see, so here's the thing: is like, yeah, there's definitely, you got the sort of crazy, yeah, billionaire, like we will transcend humanity, but there's like this weird vibe I get. It's fundamentally different than like when I look at like the transhumanism that comes from certain types of science fiction, which has a much more like evolutionary kind of point of view, where it's all about pushing. It's not that human beings are like, it recognizes, I guess, the flaws and tries to see if it can almost like escape sort of some of the more like the trappings of humanity without like eliminating what it means to be human, which is an odd question in of itself. Like, what does that mean? What does it mean to be able to transcend the problems of being a human? Because oftentimes, like, when we talk about being human, we're usually talking about the problems of being human, the flaws inherent or the struggles inherent in being human. But the like, it definitely feels like what was it? Cyberpunk definitely does this with the uploading human souls, the very billionaire, like, we could just pay rich people to live forever kind of thing. But then there's like this other trend. There's like that. There's like the sort of like what rich and powerful people all the way back from pharaohs and emperors up till, the billionaire class now. The idea that they want to live forever so that they can like consistently live forever. But then I was thinking about something like along the lines of kind of what happens a little bit in Dune, a little bit in like Armored Core, with like one of the endings in the Armored Core game is about like synthesizing the coral, which is a sentient substance that's used, like, it's like spice in Dune, but it's like alive, that's being like destroyed used as a power source. And the way out is like, one of the ways out in the game is to essentially synthesize that with human beings, so that essentially everybody kind of becomes this unified unit. And that's like also how human beings can escape. They can travel the stars, so it like allows them to escape their own sort of like the limitations of physical form, and whatever that means to be an unembodied human is kind of wild to think about. Yes, and oh yeah, Detroit Become Human heads. Yeah. That's, I feel like cyberpunk leans very heavily into, any kind of cyberpunk genre is going to lean into kind of trying to blur the bounds between what is and isn't human, what defines being embodied, or like how much does clearly having a body and the physicality of being a human influence what it means to be a human, our minds, our psyches. But I was thinking, there was a part of me that was just like, if you look at like, if you want to get like really reductive about things and look at things from like a very biological point of view, where like there's a book I just read earlier this year about determinism, specifically from like a biological point of view, not like a philosophical point of view, but like essentially free will is largely not real because of biological conditions and environmental conditions that influence the way that we make decisions, all the way down to the minutia that we actually have very little control over what we do. I'm not saying I agree with this, I'm just saying that's the thesis of the book. But what if our obsession, like the way that like post-apocalyptic movies are always so popular, and I remember one of my teachers told me this, and I thought it was brilliant. The reason we love Mad Max and like post-apocalyptic movies is because it's the only way we can imagine a world out of like a capitalistic hellhole that we live in, which I thought was infinitely funny and probably true. That the only way we could like we can imagine not living in this sort of like hierarchical system of like capital and colonization and oppression is by just it all being gone, because that's the only way we can envision a sort of fresh start. Is like, what if the only way that we felt like we had actual autonomy or will is by a sort of transhuman thesis, the thesis of essentially overcoming the sort of like existential bonds that like essentially imagine if we were aware that we did not have free will, and we were kind of, even if we wanted to do something different, we were like the sort of like compulsion biologically required us to do it. So like you can almost think of it in the sense of like an addict or something like that, or like an addiction where you don't want to do it but the compulsion is there to do it. Like what if transhumanism, like a version of transhumanism, which is just like a fantasy to grant us the will to overcome the fact that we feel like we have no power or will, which is kind of similar to the post-apocalyptic escape the capitalist hellhole kind of thesis too. But now I'm kind of thinking about that and wondering if like maybe that might kind of be interesting, and using an alien entity to try to either grant you the ability to either feel like you like the fantasy of having like a sense of freedom and autonomy, or even the sense that you can fail and fail again but still there is a way out. Dune definitely has that a little bit. But I once started writing a story where the US was transparently governed by corporations, like an all history thing. That's cool. That's super cool. I mean, that is like those are always the best stories, because you feel like, I'm pretty sure like you read like any of Gibson's like cyberpunk books, that is like kind of implied that like the sort of like broader government is just sort of a facade for like essentially a massive corporation, because in cyberpunk you never talk about the governments, you always talk about the corps. The corps are always the people who, you know, they usually have their own militaries, they have their own like everything. So that's always a good, those are I mean, I prefer those stories because I largely find them much more interesting and compelling, where there is like or the banality, what is it, the banality of bureaucracy, where all the sort of government agencies in these like cyberpunk stories are there to create bureaucracy to essentially hide the sort of essentially to create a boring system of essentially like boardroom meetings by corporations to realize how they can further control and capitalize on the markets, essentially the ability to exploit people and make infinite amounts of money and control from them. Not even money, sometimes it has nothing to do with money, it's literally just control. I had mine set around the Industrial Revolution. Okay, perfect. I have a more historical lean than a sci-fi lean. Oh, that's cool. I mean, well, if you're going back to the Industrial Revolution, there's and about corporations and all that kind of stuff, you gotta, I don't know. All I hope is that there's at least a little bit of a hat nod to good old Marx if you're going back to the Industrial Revolution, because that's good old, that's his wheelhouse back then, was fighting those battles against the factory owners in the industrial period, or at least the early part of the early part of the European Industrial Revolution. That's cool. I do like alt history. There's not enough alt history now that I think about it. I remember reading, there was one, what was that writer, that author's name? He wrote like an alt history about World War II, but it had dragons. I just remember that being really cool. But I think that's like more fantasy alt history, but alt history is it's a really fun genre to play it. I mean, shit. Speaking of cyberpunk writers, Philip K. Dick's Man in the High Tower is like probably one of the best like alt history, speculative historical fiction books ever written. Which apparently he wrote inspired by the I Ching. Like, he wrote it according to the I Ching, where he would, like, consult the I Ching, because the I Ching's the Book of Change, and it used to be kind of divining to understand how the world was changing. And apparently he wrote that specifically, like, consulting, essentially, to, like, dictate how the narrative would change and flow, which is a really interesting writing exercise. I've never tried it. There's a part of me that kind of wants to try it, but... like, sit there, feel like tossing sticks to figure out how your story's supposed to go. Anyway. Alright. I think we are good to go on our last sprint. I have to look up this more recent alt history book that was published. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, yes, please do. I'd love to read it. It's a fascinating subject, or like genre of fiction that I just haven't, outside of like the weird World War II dragon books and Philip K. Dick. That's about all I've experienced, so I will take any recs you got. All right, let's go ahead and get a rolling on our last sprint. Happy writing, everybody, and we'll see you on the other side. Forgot about ads, everybody. There's gonna be an ad that we're gonna start this off with, so just go ahead and mute, so you're not getting the ads in the ear. Alrighty, everybody. That is the end of the fourth and final sprint of the evening. But I will be back tomorrow and Friday. I usually stream on Tuesdays, but I had to delay it to Wednesday because of some editing. So from here on, usually I don't stream these nights, but anyway, I will be back probably same time, 4 to 7. 4 and 7 Thursday and Friday. So versus Andre Abbey. Well, thank you so much for joining. And we will hopefully see you all tomorrow to keep on hitting the words. We are going to go ahead and raid Liz is on, and so we're going to raid E to the Liz, because I generally hang out in there as well. So and she does sprints, so it's a blast. All right, everybody. It's been an absolute delight having you all hang out with me, and we'll see you all next time. All right, where we go? All right, there we go. Boo, boo, boo. All right, there we go. Adios, everybody.